Most people assume their struggle comes from a lack of motivation. It isn't. You know what matters, but you still delay. You sit down to work, then drift. You promise yourself this time will be different, then fold the moment the task feels heavy, boring, or uncomfortable. The real problem is not a lack of potential. It is that you keep giving comfort, mood, and weakness a vote in decisions that should be ruled by standards. In this video, you are going to see why inconsistency is not random, why self-respect keeps collapsing when feelings stay in charge, and why discipline begins the moment your emotions lose authority. This is the shift from mood-led living to standard-led living, from negotiating with weakness to governing yourself with cold clarity. Stay with me, because once you see the real pattern, you will stop calling softness by soft names. Chapter 1. You are not unmotivated. You are too soft. You keep telling yourself that your problem is motivation. It is not. You are not broken because you do not feel inspired enough. You are not stuck because you need one more speech, one more quote, or one more perfect morning to finally begin. That is the lie. The real problem is harder to hear, but it is cleaner, sharper, and more useful. You are too soft with yourself. You keep giving comfort a vote in decisions that should be made by standards. You keep asking your feelings for permission to do what your future already requires. You keep negotiating with weakness, then acting surprised when weakness keeps winning. That is the pattern. That is the trap. And until you name it correctly, you will keep feeding it. Motivation rises and falls. It is unstable by nature. It changes with sleep weather, stress, rejection, boredom hormones, and mood. If your life moves only when motivation is present, then your life is being run by conditions, not by character. That means your direction changes every time your emotions change. That means your discipline disappears the second the day stops feeling easy. That means your promises mean nothing because they were only meant to be kept on convenient days. You do not need a stronger mood. You need a stronger rule. You need to stop building your life on emotional weather. You need to stop acting as if your inner state should decide whether your obligations matter. Your obligations still matter when you feel tired. They still matter when you feel bored. They still matter when nobody is watching. They still matter when your mind starts whining. That is the line weak people do not want to hear. They want to believe they are one burst of inspiration away from a different life. They are not. They are one decision away from becoming harder on the part of themselves that keeps sabotaging everything. Look at your pattern honestly. You say you want more. Then the work becomes uncomfortable. Then your mind offers a small excuse. You are tired. You will start tomorrow. You need a better plan. You deserve a break. You need to feel ready first. And because the excuse sounds reasonable, you listen. That is how self-betrayal works. It rarely sounds dramatic. It sounds soft. It sounds kind. It sounds patient. It sounds like you are taking care of yourself, but many times you are not taking care of yourself. You are protecting the weaker version of yourself from pressure, then forcing the stronger version to live with the consequences. That is why your self-respect keeps dropping. Not because life is unfair, not because you lack talent, not because you are cursed, because deep down you know how often you have abandoned yourself in small moments. You know how many times you said you would do something and then did not do it. You know how many times you chose ease over growth, comfort over command, delay over duty. A person does not lose self-respect all at once. It leaks out through repeated self-negotiation. It leaks out every time you lower the standard to match the mood. It leaks out every time you let the softer voice inside you call the shots. The truth is simple. You are not tired because life is hard. You are exhausted because you keep living in conflict with yourself. One part of you wants greatness. Another part wants comfort. One part wants respect. Another part wants excuses. One part wants to build. Another part wants to hide. And every day you let the weaker side win, you teach yourself a brutal lesson. You teach yourself that your words cannot be trusted. You teach yourself that comfort outranks commitment. You teach yourself that your future can wait. It cannot. The life you say you want is either being built right now or delayed right now. Not later. Not after you feel different. Right now. Discipline is not a cute habit. It is not a productivity trend. It is not a morning routine with good lighting and nice music. Discipline is self-rule. Discipline is the ability to keep your word after your emotions change. Discipline is the refusal to let comfort become your commander. Discipline is how you take the wheel back from impulse laziness and self-pity. Once you understand that everything changes, you stop asking, "How do I feel today?" and start asking, "What is required today?" You stop saying, "I need motivation," and start saying, "I need obedience to the standard." You stop worshiping your moods. You start training them to sit down and stay quiet while you work. That is what stronger people do. They do not wait to feel clear before they act. They act, and clarity grows through action. They do not wait for confidence before they move. They move, and confidence grows through kept promises. They do not ask comfort what it thinks. They already know comfort always votes for less pressure, less effort, less discipline, less growth, less responsibility, less truth. And if you keep listening to that voice, you will keep getting a smaller life. You have to become more honest with yourself than that. You have to admit that some of what you call stress is really softness. Some of what you call confusion is really avoidance. Some of what you call low motivation is really a habit of bowing to the easier option. That is not an insult. It is a diagnosis. And a clean diagnosis is power. Because once you stop calling softness by soft names, you can finally declare war on it. From this point on, stop saying you are waiting for motivation. Stop talking as if the problem is outside you. Stop pretending your future is being held back by a missing feeling. Your future is being held back by every moment you let weakness speak louder than duty. That is the real battle, and it is a daily one, a private one, a brutal one. You win it when you get up without drama. You win it when you start before you feel like it. You win it when you keep the promise even on the days that feel empty. You win it when you stop treating your comfort like something sacred. Comfort is not sacred. Your future is. Your standards are. Your word is. Your life will not rise because you wanted more. Your life will rise when you become the kind of person who can no longer be talked out of doing what must be done. That is the shift. That is the line. That is where softness starts to die. And once you see it clearly, the next thing you have to cut is just as dangerous, the need to be seen trying. The need to be praised early, and the need to tell people what you plan to do before you have earned the right to say it. Chapter 2. Stop telling people what you plan to do. One of the weakest habits you can keep is talking too much about the life you have not built yet. You say your plans out loud. You tell people what you are about to start. You explain the business, the body transformation, the discipline, the schedule, the comeback, the reinvention. And for a moment, it feels good. It feels clean. It feels powerful. It feels like movement. But many times it is not movement. It is performance. It is borrowed satisfaction. It is the cheap version of progress. You are getting a reward before the work has been done. That is dangerous, because the mind loves symbols. It loves applause. It loves identity. It loves the feeling of being seen as serious. And when you tell people what you plan to do, you often get a small emotional payoff right there. Their reaction gives you a hit. Their attention gives you warmth. Their approval gives you the feeling that something important has already started. But that feeling is false fuel. It reduces the pressure to actually do the work. It tricks your nervous system into tasting progress before effort has been paid. That is why so many people talk big and stay small. They are feeding their ego with announcements instead of feeding their future with action. They love being seen as committed more than they love the long silence required to become committed. Real builders are different. They understand that unfinished plans are fragile. New standards are fragile. Early discipline is fragile. And fragile things need protection, not exposure. When you speak too soon, you invite noise into something that is not yet strong enough to survive it. Opinions come in, questions come in, doubt comes in, praise comes in, pressure comes in. Now you are no longer just building. You are performing your build. You are explaining your process. You are managing reactions. You are defending intentions. That drains energy. It divides focus. It contaminates the purity of the work. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Silence keeps your energy where it belongs. Silence protects the part of you that is still learning to stand on its own. Silence teaches you to stop needing witnesses for every act of self-respect. That matters more than most people understand. Because the person who always needs to be seen is still controlled by the outside world. If you need other people to know you are changing, then their attention is still part of your fuel. And anything that becomes part of your fuel can become part of your weakness. You must become strong enough to build without applause, strong enough to improve without an audience, strong enough to keep your word even when nobody knows what you promised yourself. That is where real power begins. The truth is that explanation is often the language of the half-committed. The person who is truly doing the work usually has less to say. They are too busy carrying the weight. They are too busy repeating the standard. They are too busy failing adjusting learning and coming back again. They do not need to keep announcing themselves because their focus is not on being believed. Their focus is on becoming undeniable. That is the shift you need. Stop trying to sound serious. Become serious. Stop trying to look disciplined. Become disciplined. Stop trying to convince people that you are changing. Change so deeply that explanation becomes unnecessary. There is another reason silence matters. Talking creates the illusion of identity. The minute you say, "I am building this, I am becoming that," or "I am starting this new life," your ego starts dressing itself in a future that has not been earned yet. That is dangerous because identity without evidence becomes fantasy. Fantasy feels good. Fantasy is easy. Fantasy lets you enjoy the image of strength while avoiding the labor that creates strength. And once a person becomes addicted to that feeling, they become all talk, all anticipation, all image, no weight. Do not let that happen to you. Build a private life that your mouth cannot cheapen. Build habits so quiet that nobody sees them until the results make silence impossible. Build standards that do not need to be explained because they show up in your schedule, your body, your work, your restraint, and your consistency. Let people misunderstand you for a while. Let them wonder. Let them think you disappeared. Let them think nothing is happening. Let them think you got quiet. Good. Quiet is useful. Quiet helps you hear yourself again. Quiet helps you separate the need to perform from the duty to improve. Quiet helps you become loyal to process instead of addicted to reaction. And yes, it will feel strange at first, because if you are used to sharing every intention, silence can feel lonely. It can feel like nobody sees you. It can feel like your effort does not count unless someone confirms it. That feeling is exactly what you need to outgrow. Because the strongest version of you cannot depend on witnesses. The strongest version of you does not need early praise to stay in the fight. The strongest version of you understands a simple rule. Results speak with an authority that words never will. A strong body does not need an announcement. Deep discipline does not need a speech. Real progress does not need constant updates. It shows. It carries weight. It changes your presence. It changes your standards. It changes the way people feel when they stand near you. That is why you must stop leaking your future through your mouth. Protect it. Guard it. Feed it with repetition, not conversation. Feed it with effort, not explanation. Feed it with silence so your energy can go where it belongs, into the work, into the standard, into the person you said you wanted to become. There is dignity in that kind of restraint. There is strength in keeping your plans close and your habits loud. There is power in becoming harder to read because you no longer need to advertise every intention. From this point on, say less. Explain less. Announce less. Seek less approval. Let your actions carry the message. Let your discipline do the talking. Let your consistency introduce you. Weak people want to be noticed early. Strong people are willing to be invisible for a while. Weak people talk to feel progress. Strong people work until progress can no longer be hidden. Choose which one you will be. Then, close your mouth, lower your head, and build. Chapter 3. Your feelings should not run your life. Most people never say, "I let my feelings control my life." They say softer things. They say, "I just do better when I am in the right mood." They say, "I need to feel ready first." They say, "Today is not a good day." They say, "I will do it when my mind is clearer." It sounds harmless. It sounds normal. It sounds human. But behind all of those phrases is the same surrender. Your internal weather is deciding your direction. Your emotions are sitting in the driver's seat. Your moods are voting on whether your standards matter. That is not freedom, that is weakness dressed up in softer language. Feelings are real, but they are unstable. They change by the hour. They rise, they fall, they react, they distort, they exaggerate, and they withdraw. They are useful as signals, but dangerous as commanders. The moment you let a temporary feeling make permanent decisions for your life, you stop being ruled by principle and start being dragged by state. That is why your days keep breaking apart. You promise one thing in a strong moment, then betray it in a weak one. You decide when you feel ambitious, then abandon the decision when you feel tired. You speak from one version of yourself and then obey another. That is how inner division becomes outer failure. It is not that you do not know what matters. It is that too often what matters loses to what feels easier in the moment. You need to understand something clean and hard. Your feelings are not your identity. They are not your authority. They are not the final truth about what should happen next. They are experiences moving through you. That is all. You can feel resistance and still act. You can feel fear and still move. You can feel boredom and still stay in the chair. You can feel doubt and still keep your word. The problem begins when you turn a feeling into an order. I feel off becomes I should stop. I feel tired becomes I should delay. I feel unmotivated becomes today does not count. This is how weak people build a weak life. They obey every internal fluctuation as if it deserves respect. It does not. Not every feeling deserves obedience. Not every emotion deserves negotiation. Not every mental state gets a vote. Some things still have to be done whether you feel aligned or not. Some duties still matter whether your mind is excited or not. Some standards must remain in place even on the days when your inner world is noisy, heavy, irritated, distracted, or flat. That is what discipline really changes. It changes the chain of command. Before discipline, your mood speaks first and your standards get dragged behind it. After discipline, your standards speak first and your feelings are forced to follow structure. That is the shift you need. You do not need to kill feeling. You need to remove its crown. You do not need to become emotionless. You need to become less obedient to emotion. There is a big difference. The immature person says, "This is how I feel, so this is what I will do." The stronger person says, "This is how I feel, but this is what must be done." That second sentence is the beginning of self-rule. It is the beginning of internal adulthood. It is the moment you stop being managed by your condition and start being managed by your code. A disciplined life is not built by feeling the right thing at the right time. It is built by doing the right thing whether the feeling arrives or not. This is why passion is not enough. Passion can ignite you, but it cannot carry you. Passion can start a fire, but duty is what keeps it burning when the night gets cold. Passion is useful for the beginning. Duty is what survives the bad days. Duty is what survives boredom. Duty is what survives stress. Duty is what survives the long middle when results are slow and nobody is clapping. If passion is your engine, you will be powerful when you feel alive and weak when you do not. If duty is your engine, you become stable even when your emotions go flat. That is why duty matters more than mood. Duty is clean. Duty is stable. Duty does not ask whether the task feels exciting. Duty does not ask whether the morning feels inspired. Duty does not ask whether the body wants comfort. Duty asks one question: what is required now? That question changes everything. It cuts through drama. It cuts through self-pity. It cuts through overthinking. It cuts through the emotional fog that weak people keep calling complexity. When you ask what is required, you return to reality. And reality is usually simpler than your feelings want it to be. The work is there. The standard is there. The next action is there. The only reason you keep getting stuck is that you keep treating your internal noise like serious authority. Stop doing that. Start noticing it instead. This is one of the most important shifts you can make. Stop saying, "I feel like quitting." Start saying, "I notice the feeling to quit." Stop saying, "I am overwhelmed." Start saying, "I notice a wave of overwhelm." Stop saying, "I am not ready." Start saying, "I notice resistance." This language matters because it creates distance. It stops you from merging with every passing state. It reminds you that you are the one observing the feeling, not the one enslaved by it. That distance is power. Once you can observe a feeling, instead of instantly becoming it, you regain choice. You regain control. You stop drowning inside every emotion that enters the room. Too many people call themselves honest when they are only being obedient to their current state. They say, "I am just being real. I do not feel it today." No. Real would be admitting that you have made comfort your ruler. Real would be admitting that your emotional life has too much authority over your behavior. Real would be admitting that your future keeps getting sacrificed to the emotional preferences of the present. You have to stop worshiping honesty at the level of feeling and start practicing honesty at the level of pattern. The pattern is what matters. The pattern says everything. If your mood is always deciding whether you train, whether you focus, whether you build, or whether you finish, then your mood is your master. And if your mood is your master, then your life will always be unstable because moods are unstable by design. The strongest people are not people with easier emotions. They are people with clearer rules. They have trained themselves to act while carrying discomfort. They have trained themselves to keep moving without needing internal applause. They have trained themselves to stop asking their feelings for permission. That is freedom. Not doing what you feel like doing, not chasing whatever emotion is loudest. Real freedom is being able to do what is right even when your feelings are trying to pull you in another direction. Real freedom is not being controlled by the storm inside you. If every internal state can redirect your day, then you are not free. You are available to be controlled by anything. Stress can move you. Fear can move you. Boredom can move you. Rejection can move you. Fatigue can move you. One bad hour can steal the whole day. That is not a system. That is exposure. That is fragility. And fragility is expensive. It costs you promises, progress, self-respect, momentum, credibility, and peace. You do not fix that by chasing better feelings. You fix it by building a colder operating system. You say to yourself, my emotions can speak, but they do not decide. My discomfort can exist, but it does not command. My resistance can rise, but it does not get the final word. The final word belongs to the standard. The final word belongs to duty. The final word belongs to what needs to be done. This is how you start becoming dangerous in the right way. Not loud, not dramatic, not intense for 1 week. Dangerous because you cannot be easily talked out of your own path by a passing emotion. Dangerous because your inner weather no longer controls your outer behavior. Dangerous because your standards remain standing even when your mood collapses. Once that happens, a different kind of life becomes possible. You stop asking, do I want to, and start asking, does this need to be done? You stop asking, am I in the mood, and start asking, what does the standard require? You stop waiting for the emotional green light. You move because your code already gave the order. That is the first real layer of discipline. That is where your feelings lose the throne. That is where your life starts to become steadier than your state. And once you understand that feelings should not run your life, you need a harder skill next. You need to stop giving your mind time to build a case against action. You need to move before comfort hires a lawyer inside your head. Chapter 4. Do it before your mind talks you out of it. The mind is clever. Too clever. It does not always attack you with obvious sabotage. It rarely says, destroy your future today. It says something softer, something reasonable, something that sounds patient, mature, and intelligent. It says, do it later. It says, you are tired right now. It says, you should prepare a little more first. It says, today is messy. Tomorrow will be cleaner. It says, wait until you can do it properly. It says, take a few minutes and then start. This is how comfort protects itself. It does not need a dramatic lie. It only needs a delay. That is the danger. Most people do not ruin their discipline with one giant collapse. They ruin it through hundreds of tiny postponements that look harmless in isolation and deadly in repetition. A life does not drift because of one excuse. It drifts because of 1,000 quiet permissions. You sit instead of stand. You scroll instead of start. You explain instead of execute. You say later instead of now. And because each delay feels small, you do not treat it like betrayal. But that is what it is. It is a small betrayal repeated until it becomes a personality. That is why you must learn to act before your mind has time to build a courtroom around the task. Because the longer you think, the more material the weaker part of you has to work with. The longer the gap between intention and action, the higher the chance that comfort will organize a defense. It will bring in witnesses, fatigue, fear, perfectionism, doubt, distraction, and false priorities. You will suddenly have reasons, and they will sound intelligent. That is why overthinking is so dangerous. It gives weakness time to become articulate. It gives laziness time to sound wise. It gives avoidance time to dress itself as strategy. Do not fall for that. You need a rule here, a cold rule, a short rule. Move before the mind escapes. That is the rule. When you know what needs to be done, do not open an inner trial. Do not sit there asking every part of yourself how it feels. Do not invite debate. Do not hand the microphone to comfort. Stand up. Move. Begin. Break the stillness before the excuse machine warms up. Motion is the interrupt. Motion is the cut. Motion is how you deny the weaker self the time it needs to gain control. This is why fast action matters. Not reckless action, not blind action. Fast action on known duties. If the task is already clear, the next move should be physical, not philosophical. Open the file, put the phone away, sit at the desk, put on the shoes, walk to the door, start the timer, write the first line, lift the first rep, send the first message, clean the first section, read the first page. The first movement does not need to be heroic. It needs to be immediate. That is the point. You are not trying to finish the whole mountain in one breath. You are trying to stop the negotiation before it takes over the room. Weak people wait for a big internal shift. They wait to feel serious. They wait to feel clear. They wait to feel committed. Stronger people understand that action itself creates the shift. They start cold. They start flat. They start without romance. They start because starting is the attack. Once movement begins, resistance loses some of its power. Once the body is in motion, the mind has less room to keep inventing distance. That is the mechanic you must trust. Start small, but start now. That principle matters because many people still sabotage themselves with perfection. They think if the first action is not big, it does not count. Wrong. A small action taken immediately has more power than a perfect plan delayed for 2 hours. A tiny move made now is often more honest than a huge promise made for later. The job of the first move is not to impress you. The job of the first move is to kill hesitation. Once hesitation loses oxygen, the rest becomes easier. This is where real discipline is formed. Not in rare moments of massive inspiration, not in dramatic declarations. Discipline is built in the tiny seconds when you choose movement over inner debate. That is the forge. That is where identity changes. Every day your life is decided in small, private moments. Sit or stand, scroll or start, delay or do it, pick up the phone or open the work. Explain or execute. Stay in bed or move your feet to the floor. Nobody claps for those moments. Nobody sees them, but those moments are where your future is either protected or sold. Each time you move before comfort takes over you, add one more layer to a different identity. You become a person who acts faster than excuses. You become a person whose word has less distance from behavior. You become a person who can be trusted by himself. That matters more than people understand, because self-trust is not built by thinking highly of yourself. It is built by seeing yourself obey in hard moments. Every time you hesitate too long and then fold, you send yourself a message. I can be talked out of my duty. Every time you move fast and honor the task, you send a different message. I do not need a debate to do what must be done. Over time, those messages become your character. This is why subtle delay is so dangerous. It does not feel like quitting, so people excuse it. But slow betrayal is still betrayal. I will do it in a little while has destroyed more discipline than outright refusal, because it creates the illusion that you are still committed while the standard is already dying. You must become ruthless with that pattern. Not emotional, not dramatic. Ruthless. When the task is known, shorten the distance. When duty is clear, reduce the time between decision and action. Train the body to move before the mind escapes. Train the hand to begin before the excuse is finished. Train yourself to respect the first command, not the second feeling. This does not mean you never plan. It does not mean you never rest. It means you stop letting unnecessary thought become an escape tunnel. It means you stop confusing hesitation with wisdom. It means you stop treating comfort's voice as if it deserves extended attention. Most of the time, it does not. Most of the time, it just needs to be outrun by action. So remember the rule: move before the mind escapes. If the duty is known, the body should move before the excuse grows teeth. Know the task. Move quickly. Make the first action physical. Do not wait for emotional alignment. Do not chase the perfect block of time. Do not ask whether you feel inspired enough. Begin before your mind starts presenting alternatives. Begin before weakness takes shape. Begin before delay becomes a story. The people who keep changing their lives are not always the most talented. They are often the ones who give their weaker self less time to speak. They have shortened the window of betrayal. They have reduced the space between knowing and doing. They have learned that progress belongs to the person who acts before the inner lawyer finishes the opening statement. That is how you win more days. That is how you stop dying by small postponements. That is how discipline leaves the world of ideas and enters your nervous system. And once you build that reflex, you are no longer only fighting your feelings. You are beginning to outmaneuver your own excuses. That changes everything. Chapter 5. Learn to be alone without feeling empty. A lot of people say they are afraid of being alone, but that is not the full truth. They are not only afraid of solitude, they are afraid of what silence reveals. They are afraid of the version of themselves that becomes visible when the noise stops. The crowd helps them forget. The phone helps them numb out. Constant input helps them avoid the harder question. What is left of you when nobody is watching, nobody is praising, nobody is texting GoBuddy? Is pulling you into distraction and nothing is covering the sound of your own unfinished life. That is why so many people keep themselves surrounded, stimulated, entertained, and occupied. Not because all connection is bad, not because people are the enemy, but because noise is a very effective hiding place. Noise lets you delay self-confrontation. Noise lets you stay half awake. Noise lets you keep your standards blurry. Once the room gets quiet, all of that starts to crack. Then you can hear it. The excuses, the restlessness, the need for attention, the weakness you kept dressing up as just needing company. This is why solitude feels heavy to weak people. Not because being alone is inherently empty, but because being alone removes anesthesia. It exposes what has been rotting beneath distraction. That exposure is not your enemy. That exposure is the beginning of truth. And truth is where rebuilding starts. You need to stop treating solitude like a punishment. It is not a punishment. It is a training ground. It is a private room where your character stops performing and starts revealing itself. When there is no audience, no reaction, no social energy to feed on you, find out whether your drive is real or borrowed. You find out whether your discipline has roots or only momentum. You find out whether your goals matter enough to survive in silence. That matters more than most people understand. Because a person who cannot stand to be alone usually cannot carry serious responsibility for long. Why? Because serious responsibility requires long stretches of internal stability. It requires focus without applause. It requires effort without witnesses. It requires the ability to keep building while the world is quiet and nobody is confirming that you are doing well. If you always need external stimulation to stay alive inside, then your operating system is too dependent. You are still leaning on the environment to create a state you should have learned to generate yourself. That is not power. Power is being able to stay with yourself without collapsing into emptiness. Power is being able to sit in a quiet room and still know what matters. Power is being able to work. Think, plan, and correct yourself without needing immediate social oxygen. That is what solitude can teach you if you stop running from it. Being alone does not make you weak. It reveals where you are weak. That is a crucial difference. If you sit by yourself and instantly feel restless, hollow, scattered, and desperate for stimulation, that is not a sign that solitude is bad for you. It is a sign that you have been too dependent on noise to regulate yourself. It is a sign that your inner life has not been trained enough. And instead of escaping that realization, you need to use it. You need to let solitude expose the instability so you can finally build stability. That is what stronger people do. They do not panic when silence reveals disorder. They see it as usable information. They see it as a map. They see where their mind runs, where their attention breaks, where their cravings speak, and where their standards go soft. Then they begin the harder work. They begin to train stillness. They begin to train attention. They begin to train loyalty to the mission without emotional entertainment. That is how inner weight is built. Not through constant connection, not through endless reaction, through silence, through repetition, through private obedience. Solitude is where excuses get louder, but also where they become easier to recognize. In noise, your avoidance can hide. In quiet, it has nowhere to go. In noise, distraction feels normal. In quiet, distraction becomes obvious. In noise, you can keep telling yourself you are trying. In quiet, you find out whether you are actually doing the work or only enjoying the image of effort. That is why solitude is such a powerful filter. It strips away performance. It strips away borrowed identity. It strips away the artificial energy of being seen. Then what remains is yours. Or it is not. If it is not good. Now you know. Now you can stop pretending and start training. There is another thing you need to understand. Solitude is not only about being physically alone. Some people are alone all day and still never enter solitude because they are drowning in devices, feeds, messages, music, and endless stimulation. They are still surrounded. They are still scattered. They are still available to interruption every second. That is not solitude. That is private noise. Real solitude is designed. It means cutting what weakens concentration, cutting what keeps your nervous system addicted to novelty, cutting what keeps your mind jumping away from the task. It means creating an environment where the mission has a chance to win. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is remove what makes weakness easier. Put distance between yourself and what keeps your attention leaking. Put distance between yourself and the habits that dilute your mind. Put distance between yourself and the constant low-grade stimulation that keeps you too entertained to go deep. Isolation used correctly is not social self-destruction. It is strategic design. It is how you protect the conditions needed for concentration, self-control, and internal repair. The weaker self hates this because the weaker self wants easy access to numbness. It wants quick relief. It wants to feel surrounded. It wants to feel seen. It wants to feel like it exists through reaction. But your strongest self is built differently. It does not need constant confirmation to stay alive. It does not need to keep checking whether anyone noticed. It does not need applause to stay on the path. This is where stage 1 becomes real at a deeper level. If nobody knows you are trying and you keep going, that is strength. If nobody praises the effort and you still return tomorrow, that is strength. If nobody claps, nobody asks, nobody validates, and yet the standard remains, that is strength. That is when your identity starts changing for real. Because now, your behavior is no longer powered by visibility. It is powered by code. Solitude becomes the test. Do you really have a mission, or do you just have a desire to be seen having one? Do you really want growth, or do you mostly want the emotional experience of looking committed? A quiet room answers that question faster than any speech will. And the answer may hurt. Good. Let it hurt. Pain that reveals truth is useful. The point is not to become a hermit. The point is not to hate people. The point is to become a person who can stand on his own nervous system. A person who can remain with himself without needing immediate escape. A person who can hear the silence and not call it emptiness, because it is not emptiness. It is space, space to think, space to sharpen, space to hear your own standards again, space to build a mind that is less dependent, less hungry, and less easily manipulated by stimulation. That is not loss. That is growth. Learn to sit in your own company long enough to stop fearing it. Learn to work without witnesses long enough to trust yourself more than applause. Learn to protect your environment long enough to feel what real focus starts to do to your life. One day, you will notice the shift. Being alone will stop feeling like deprivation. It will start feeling like control. It will start feeling like clean air after too much noise. It will start feeling like a place where your mind can finally line up behind something serious. And once that happens, another reality will hit you. The more serious you become, the more some people will resist the new version of you. Not because you are wrong, because your change makes them uncomfortable. Chapter 6. Not everyone will like the new you. The moment you become more serious, more disciplined, more private, more selective, and less available to nonsense. Some people will not celebrate it. They will not always say it directly. They will not always attack you openly. Sometimes it will come as jokes. Sometimes it will come as distance. Sometimes it will come as tension, confusion, irritation, or that strange shift in energy when people realize they no longer have the same access to you. You need to be ready for that. Growth has a social cost. The new you will not be comfortable for everyone. That is not a tragedy. That is a tax. Pay it. For a long time, people knew how to place you. They knew your rhythm. They knew your softness. They knew what version of you would answer, explain, join, react, bend, delay, and stay available. Then you changed. You got quieter. You got more exact. You started saying no more often. You stopped needing to be included in everything. You stopped oversharing. You stopped seeking approval. You stopped handing your schedule, your focus, and your emotional energy to whoever happened to knock on the door. Of course, some people will feel something. Your change disrupts the old arrangement. It removes a version of you they were familiar with. And not everyone is mature enough to welcome that. Some people are uncomfortable not because you became worse, but because you became harder to access, harder to distract, harder to influence, harder to pull back into old patterns. That is what bothers them, not always your growth itself, but the loss of their old position in relation to you. You need to understand this clearly. Not all resistance is evil. Not all criticism is malicious. Sometimes people are simply reacting to change. Sometimes they do not know what to do with a version of you that no longer fits the old script. Sometimes your seriousness forces them to look at their own lack of seriousness. Sometimes your restraint exposes their impulsiveness. Sometimes your standards make their excuses louder in their own head. And instead of dealing with that discomfort honestly, they describe you as the problem. This is where many people collapse. They start changing, then they feel social friction, then they panic and shrink back to keep the room comfortable. Do not do that. Do not become smaller to make other people feel less confronted by your discipline. Do not water yourself down to remain easier to consume. Do not trade your direction for smoother social approval. The price is too high. A lot of people will call the new you by the wrong name. They will say you are cold. They will say you are obsessed. They will say you are distant. They will say you have changed. Good. You should have changed. That is the point. Do not hear those words too quickly as proof that you are wrong. Many times those words are simply how people describe a person who can no longer be easily managed. Cold may mean you no longer over-explain. Too intense may mean you no longer drift through life casually. Different may mean you have stopped participating in habits that keep everyone comfortably mediocre. Do not let labels from weaker systems define your path. Listen carefully. Learn what is true. Correct what needs correcting. But do not automatically fold because someone became uncomfortable with your boundaries. Not every relationship deserves to be saved at the cost of your growth. That is a hard sentence, but you need it. Some relationships only function when you are softer, easier, smaller, more available, and less serious. Some connections survive only when you keep betraying yourself a little to preserve harmony. If peace requires you to stay weak, that peace is too expensive. If connection requires you to abandon your standards, that connection is built on the wrong version of you. This does not mean you cut people carelessly. It does not mean you become arrogant. It means you stop treating every strained reaction as a command to shrink. It means you accept that some links were built around an older identity that you are now outgrowing. That happens. Let it happen. Maturity is not forcing every old bridge to hold forever. Maturity is knowing when a bridge only exists because you kept crawling across it as a smaller version of yourself. Freedom requires thicker skin. If you need to be liked by everyone, then you will belong to everyone except yourself. That is the trap. The need to stay pleasant, approved, and easily accepted will make you compromise in places that slowly erase you. You will answer when you should be silent. You will bend when you should stand. You will join when you should walk away. You will explain when you should protect your energy. You will keep old access points open because you fear what people will think if you close them. That is not kindness. That is dependence on approval, and dependence always gets expensive. Stronger people understand the cost of seriousness. They know there will be misunderstanding. They know there will be projection. They know there will be comments, assumptions, and maybe distance. But they also know something greater. Being misunderstood is often cheaper than betraying your future. Being called different is cheaper than staying weak. Being less liked is cheaper than becoming less yourself. That is the trade. Accept it cleanly. You do not need to become cruel. You do not need to become hostile. You do not need to perform toughness. Just stop apologizing for becoming more focused. Stop apologizing for protecting your time. Stop apologizing for changing your standards. Stop apologizing for taking your life seriously. Some people will respect it later. Some will never understand it. Neither outcome changes the work. Your job is not to make your growth easy for everyone else to digest. Your job is to protect the direction. Your job is to remain loyal to the standard even when the social temperature changes. This is part of becoming harder to break. You build the ability to hold your line without emotional drama. You build the ability to let people think what they think while you keep moving. You build the ability to survive a little less comfort in the social world so you can gain much more power in your inner world. That is a worthy trade. So let people adjust. Let some relationships thin out. Let some rooms feel different. Let some labels come and go. You are not here to be explained perfectly to everyone. You are here to become someone your old weakness can no longer recognize. That kind of growth always costs something. Good. Pay it. Then keep walking. Because once you stop needing noise and stop needing approval, you are finally ready for a heavier form of strength. You are ready to build presence. You are ready to become the kind of person who does not react quickly, does not fold easily, and does not hand away power through every emotion that passes through the room. Chapter 7. The less you react, the stronger you become. Most people give away power in seconds, not because they are weak in some dramatic way, because they are too available to reaction. A look changes them. A comment moves them. A delay irritates them. A little disrespect pulls them out of position. A message ruins the hour. A bad mood in the room enters their nervous system and starts directing their behavior. They keep calling this normal. It is common, yes. But common is not the same as strong. If your state can be altered by every small disturbance, then your life is too open, too exposed, too easy to touch. That is not control, that is vulnerability wearing the costume of emotional honesty. You need to learn something colder than that. Reaction is often surrender. Immediate reaction is often proof that something outside you still has too much access to your inner world. The stronger person is not the one who feels nothing. The stronger person is the one who is not rushed into expression, not dragged into impulsive response, and not forced to reveal his state every time pressure enters the room. This matters because reaction leaks information. It leaks weakness. It leaks instability. It tells people where you are easy to move, easy to provoke, and easy to bend. And once the world learns where you are easy to bend, it will keep pressing there. That is why control of reaction is not just maturity. It is protection. It is power. Think about how much damage has been done in your life by fast reactions. Words spoken too early, decisions made in anger, messages sent while hurt, commitments dropped in frustration, standards broken because a feeling rose too fast and you obeyed it before it cooled. A lot of people do not lose because they lack intelligence. They lose because they are too immediate. They have no space between stimulus and response, no pause, no command, no discipline in the moment when the body wants to discharge tension. That is where strength must be built, not only in long plans and big goals, but in the tiny window between what happens to you and what you choose to do next. That window is where power lives. If you control that window, you control a great part of your life. If you lose that window, you will keep being steered by events, people, moods, and pressures that should never have had that much authority over you. The weaker version of you wants instant release. It wants to answer now, prove now, defend now, explain now, show the emotion now. It mistakes discharge for strength. It thinks expression is the same as power. It is not. Many times, the strongest thing you can do is hold the line without revealing the storm. Many times, the strongest thing you can do is say less, show less, and let the first wave pass before you choose your position. That is not repression, that is command. Repression is pretending you feel nothing. Command is feeling it, noticing it, and refusing to let it hijack your behavior. There is a huge difference. A reactive person belongs to the moment. A controlled person belongs to the standard. That is the difference you need. Your emotions can rise, your irritation can rise, your ego can get hit, your pride can get touched, but none of that should automatically produce output. Not every trigger deserves a response. Not every offense deserves attention. Not every inconvenience deserves emotion. Not every opinion deserves your energy. The less you react to what does not matter, the more force you preserve for what does. That is one of the deepest forms of strength. You do not waste bullets on every noise in the dark. You do not hand your state to every random interruption. You do not let small things rent space in your head all day. Calm is not passivity. Calm is control over where your power goes. There is something else you need to see. People trust what is stable. They respect what is hard to shake. They feel the weight of a person who does not twitch under pressure. A person who is always reacting becomes easy to predict, easy to read, easy to manage. But a person who stays composed forces the room to adjust. Why? Because non-reaction creates uncertainty. It creates gravity. It tells the world that not every external movement will get an internal response from you. That changes your presence. It changes the psychological price of trying to pull you off center. This is why stillness has force. This is why silence can dominate noise. This is why restraint can feel heavier than expression. Not because silence is magic, but because silence shows command. It shows that you do not need to throw your state into the room every time something touches you. That is rare, and rare things carry weight. Start training this in small moments. When you feel the urge to answer fast, slow down. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause. When irritation rises, do not give it your mouth right away. When someone misreads you, resist the craving to correct everything instantly. When discomfort enters the body, stay with it for a moment before you act. Build the pause. Build the breath. Build the distance between impact and output. That distance is where your new identity is formed. The point is not to become cold in the dead sense. The point is to become colder in the stable sense. Less available to chaos, less easy to provoke, less likely to leak your center every time pressure appears. That is what makes a person harder to bend. He is not perfect. He is not numb. He is not pretending. He simply has a chain of command inside himself. The feeling arrives. The feeling is noticed. The standard decides. That is strength. The less you react, the more you can choose. The more you can choose, the more your life belongs to you. And once you stop wasting power through reaction, the next thing you must build becomes even more visible. You must become so consistent that doubt loses its voice. Chapter 8. Be so consistent. They stop doubting you. Anyone can be intense for 3 days. Anyone can make a declaration. Anyone can have a clean morning, a hard workout, a sharp speech, a serious face, and one burst of discipline that looks impressive from the outside. That is not rare. That is theater. The rare thing is consistency. The rare thing is repetition without drama. The rare thing is a person who comes back again and again with the same standard, the same seriousness, and the same refusal to disappear when the feeling changes. That is what creates real trust. But trust is only the surface. There is a heavier effect. True consistency creates inevitability. It creates the feeling that you are not a phase, not a burst, not a mood, not a temporary version of discipline that disappears when life gets ugly. It creates the feeling that you are coming again tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. That is what becomes intimidating. Not noise, not charisma, not one explosive week. The intimidating person is the one who does not drift, the one who does not need a perfect mood to stay in motion, the one who keeps arriving until resistance gets tired of fighting him. Most people want to be believed too early. They want others to trust their intentions, respect their promises, and admire their direction before the evidence has had time to accumulate. But trust is not built by declarations. It is built by repeated proof. Self-trust works the same way. Other people stop doubting you after enough evidence. You stop doubting yourself after enough evidence. That is why consistency matters so much. It is the bridge between intention and identity. Without it, you are just a person with occasional strong moments. With it, you become a person with weight. A person with weight does not need to announce what kind of man he is. His pattern says it. He shows up. He does the work. He keeps the standard. He does not need constant emotional ignition because he has already turned behavior into a system. That is what weaker people misunderstand. They chase intensity because intensity feels powerful. It feels alive. It feels like transformation. But intensity without consistency is unstable. It creates spikes and collapses. It creates hope and disappointment. It creates big promises and weak follow-through. Over time, that destroys trust not only in the eyes of others, but in your own nervous system. Because every time you go all in for 3 days and then vanish, you teach yourself a terrible lesson. You teach yourself that your seriousness is temporary. You teach yourself that your strongest version cannot stay. You teach yourself that your own momentum cannot be trusted. Consistency teaches the opposite lesson. It may look less dramatic, but it builds something far more dangerous. It builds credibility. It builds internal authority. It builds a self-image based on proof instead of fantasy. And it builds a presence that starts to feel inevitable. That word matters. Inevitable. Because once people have seen you return enough times, they stop reading your discipline as excitement. They start reading it as identity. Once they have seen you hold the line through boring days, stressful days, quiet days, and hard days, they stop waiting for you to drift. They begin to assume you will still be there. That is a different kind of force. The first kind of force shocks people. The second kind exhausts doubt. The first kind is loud. The second kind is cold. The first kind attracts attention. The second kind makes resistance feel useless. That is why the most dangerous person is not the most dramatic one. It is the person who cannot easily be knocked off pattern. the person who keeps coming back, the person whose behavior no longer depends on inspiration to stay intact. That kind of steadiness wears down disbelief. It wears down excuses. It wears down the part of other people that wants to dismiss you as another temporary burst. It even wears down the skeptic inside you. The part of you that used to say, maybe this is another phase, maybe you will quit again, maybe this is temporary, starts losing its case. Why? Because evidence is stacking. That is the beauty of consistency. It silences doubt through repetition, not through speeches. You do not need to hype yourself into belief. You need to collect proof, one day at a time, one return at a time, one kept standard at a time. That is how a stronger self is built. Not by asking, do I believe in myself today? By asking, what proof did I produce today? Belief based on emotion is fragile. Belief based on evidence is heavy. Build the heavy kind. And do not confuse consistency with perfection. Consistency does not mean you never miss. It means missing does not become an identity. It means a bad day does not become a bad month. It means you correct quickly. You return quickly. You do not turn one slip into a story about how you always fail. That is weakness looking for permission to spread. A consistent person protects the chain. He understands that the return matters as much as the run. He understands that stability is not the absence of error. It is the refusal to stay away too long. This matters because life will not give you clean conditions forever. You will be tired, distracted, hit, misread, pressured, tested. If your discipline works only in easy conditions, then it does not work. Consistency is what proves your system can survive reality. It proves you are becoming less dependent on emotion, novelty, praise, and perfect timing. It proves you are becoming the kind of person who can be counted on. That phrase matters. Counted on. Can your future count on you? Can your standards count on you? Can your promises count on you? That is the real question, and the answer will never come from what you say. It will come from what you keep repeating. So stop chasing the image of being impressive. Start becoming reliable. Stop chasing the high of a strong beginning. Start respecting the grind of steady return. Stop trying to convince people you are serious. Become so consistent that explanation becomes insulting. Let your pattern speak. Let your rhythm speak. Let your return speak. Let the standard repeat until doubt has no language left. Let your consistency become so steady that people stop seeing effort and start seeing inevitability. That is when your presence changes. That is when your discipline stops looking motivational and starts looking structural. That is when other people stop waiting for you to fall off. That is when your reliability becomes intimidating. Once you become consistent, you are no longer living as a person with occasional control. You are becoming a person with structure. And structure leads to the final layer of this stage. You must raise the floor of your life. You must stop living at the level of your goals and start living at the level of your standards. Chapter 9. Raise your standards and protect your time. Your life does not rise to the level of your goals. It falls to the level of your standards. Goals are what you say you want. Standards are what you actually allow. Goals are language. Standards are law. Goals sound good in public. Standards show up in private. That is why goals alone do not change a life. A person can speak beautifully about who he wants to become and still live in a way that protects the exact habits destroying that future. A person can say he wants discipline, strength, respect, peace, focus, success, and depth, then continue tolerating lateness, distraction, half-effort, weak boundaries, soft decisions, wasted nights, wasted mornings, and the constant leakage of time into things that carry no weight. That is the contradiction. And contradiction always costs. You cannot keep a high vision and a low floor without paying for it in self-respect. Standards are the floor. They are the minimum line you do not negotiate beneath. They answer a harder question than goals do. Not what do you want to become, but what will you no longer allow yourself to remain. That is why standards are moral before they are productive. They are about the kind of person you are willing to be. Every repeated low behavior is a quiet agreement with a lower identity. Every tolerated weakness is a sentence in a contract you are signing with your smaller self. That is why this chapter matters. You do not need more ambition nearly as much as you need a stronger floor. You need certain things in your life to become non-negotiable. Not because you want to look disciplined, because you are done living with the internal rot that comes from constant self-exception. A person becomes weak when everything is flexible. Wake time is flexible. Work time is flexible. Training is flexible. Focus is flexible. Boundaries are flexible. Screen time is flexible. Promises are flexible. Standards are flexible. That kind of life feels free for a while, but it produces decay. Why? Because endless flexibility in a weak mind becomes endless escape. It becomes a system where the easier option can always plead its case and often win. That is not freedom. That is slow surrender. Stronger people build a harder floor. They decide what kind of behavior is no longer available to them. They do not wait to feel noble about it. They simply remove negotiation. That is the difference. A standard is not a wish. It is a line. Once a line is real, it begins to protect you from yourself. Comfort becomes more dangerous the more you misunderstand it. Used correctly, comfort is recovery. It helps you restore what serious effort has depleted. Used badly, comfort becomes corrosion. It teaches you to avoid pressure too quickly. It teaches you to soften the edge every time difficulty appears. It teaches you to seek relief before growth has had time to do its work. And because comfort feels harmless in the moment, many people keep underestimating the damage. They think the price is small. One delay, one indulgence, one weak choice, one lost night, one wasted hour, one lowered standard. But the true price is rarely in the moment. The true price is in what those repetitions train. They train your expectations. They train your tolerance. They train your identity. They teach you what kind of life you are willing to accept. That is why you must become more hostile to undisciplined comfort. Not hostile to rest. Not hostile to joy. Hostile to the kind of comfort that makes you smaller. Hostile to the kind of comfort that keeps shrinking your future so the present can stay easy. Hostile to the patterns that always ask for relief before they have earned it. Raising your standards means deciding that certain forms of weakness no longer get to live in your house. No more casual disrespect toward your own time. No more endless access for distraction. No more treating your morning like it belongs to impulse. No more giving your best energy away to things that do not build anything. No more living as if time is cheap. Time is not cheap. Time is a strategic asset. It is the field where identity gets built or buried. Every hour is either feeding the person you are trying to become or feeding the person you said you wanted to leave behind. That is why how you use time is not just a productivity issue. It is a self-respect issue. A person who wastes time repeatedly is not only losing hours, he is teaching himself that his future is negotiable. He is teaching himself that his word can be delayed. He is teaching himself that his best years can be handed to distraction without a fight. That is too expensive. Protect your time like it belongs to something sacred because it does. It belongs to the life you keep saying you want. Weak people treat time like loose change. Stronger people treat it like capital. They budget it, guard it, aim it, defend it. They do not let everyone and everything take pieces of it without consequence. They know that if time leaks, identity leaks with it. This is why standards, time, and self-respect are tied together. Raise one, and the others can rise with it. Betray one, and the others start falling together. So ask yourself a harder question. What do you allow too often? What do you keep tolerating that is training weakness? Where have you made peace with a lower floor? Be honest. Your life is already answering. Your schedule answers. Your habits answer. Your phone answers. Your evenings answer. Your boundaries answer. Your body answers. Your focus answers. Your results answer. Stop reading your goals for proof of who you are. Read your tolerated patterns. They tell the truth. Then do the harder thing. Raise the floor. Choose a standard that does not move just because your mood does. Choose a line that remains a line when the day gets uncomfortable. Choose a rule that protects the future from the emotional hunger of the present. This is how a person becomes difficult to bend. Not by acting intense, not by making noise, by living under a standard that does not beg comfort for permission. Protect your time, raise your standards. Stop treating your life like something flexible enough to be shaped by every passing urge. You are building a stronger self now. People with real weight are built by what they refuse to negotiate. Chapter 10. The old you has to die. You cannot keep the same identity and expect a different life. That is the truth people avoid because it sounds too final. They want change without burial. They want growth without loss. They want a new future while secretly preserving the same habits, the same excuses, the same emotional addictions, the same weak agreements with comfort, the same hunger for approval, the same reflex to delay, and the same softness that has already betrayed them 100 times. It does not work like that. A new life is not built by decorating the old self. It is built by ending the rule of the old self. That is what most people refuse to do. They keep trying to add discipline on top of an identity that is still organized around escape. They keep trying to add focus on top of a mind that still worships distraction. They keep trying to add standards on top of a nervous system that still bows to mood. Then they wonder why the structure never holds. It never holds because the foundation is still loyal to the wrong king. The old you is not just a memory. It is a pattern. It is a system. It is a way of deciding, reacting, excusing, and negotiating. It is the version of you that always looks for comfort before growth, applause before proof, relief before responsibility, explanation before execution. It is the version that keeps saying tomorrow, because today feels inconvenient. It is the version that knows the standard but still asks the mood for permission. That version cannot lead you anymore. Not because it is evil, because it is weak. And weakness repeated long enough becomes betrayal. This is why a clean break matters. You do not need a softer relationship with the self that keeps ruining your future. You need separation. You need to stop speaking about that older pattern as if it deserves endless patience. It has already had enough patience. It has already been given enough chances. How many times have you promised change and then returned to the same softness? How many times have you seen exactly where your life leaks and still protected the leak because cutting it felt too uncomfortable? At some point, insight is not the problem. At some point, understanding is not the problem. At some point, the problem is that the old self is still being allowed to live rent-free inside your decisions. You keep feeding it. You keep explaining it. You keep making room for it. Then you call yourself stuck. You are not stuck. You are divided. One side of you wants a stronger future. The other side keeps protecting the habits that belong to a weaker past. Division always drains power. Division always slows movement. Division always creates internal noise. That is why this stage has to be harsher. You do not need another polite conversation with the old version of you. You need a funeral. The old you has to die. Not physically, not theatrically, functionally. Its authority has to die. Its access has to die. Its vote has to die. The old voice that says, rest before you earn it, explain instead of act, seek comfort first. Tell people your plans, react fast. Bend the standard, delay the work, and chase the easy escape must stop being treated like part of your leadership. It can still appear. It can still whisper. But it no longer gets command. That is what death means here. The end of its rule, the end of its status, the end of its right to shape your life. This is where many people get sentimental. They say, but that older version of me was just trying to survive. Maybe. Fine, understand it, then move on. Survival patterns that once protected you can later imprison you. The same softness that once felt like relief can become rot. The same emotional habits that once helped you avoid pain can later keep you weak, reactive, distracted, dependent, and easy to break. You do not honor your past by obeying every pattern it created. You honor your future by deciding which patterns are no longer allowed to continue. That is maturity, not endless sympathy for weakness. Clear judgment about what must stop. Let this become simple. If a behavior belongs to the old self, cut its authority. If a pattern makes you smaller, stop defending it. If a habit keeps feeding the identity you said you wanted to leave behind, bury it. Stop romanticizing what keeps ruining you. Some people stay loyal to an older identity because they are afraid of what real change will cost. Real change costs familiarity. It costs old reactions. It costs old comforts. It costs the little emotional rituals that used to soothe you. It costs the image you had of yourself. It costs the excuses you used to protect. It costs the relationships built around your softer form. It costs the pleasure of saying, "This is just how I am." Good. Pay it. "This is just how I am" has destroyed countless futures. It is one of the weakest sentences a person can keep repeating when the current version of him is not good enough to carry the life he says he wants. Identity is not a prison sentence. Identity is a pattern that can be rebuilt through repeated action, but only if you stop bowing to the old pattern every time it asks for one more chance. There has to be a point where you become tired of betraying yourself in the same ways. There has to be a point where disgust becomes useful. A calm disgust. A clear disgust. The kind that says enough. Not because you hate yourself, but because you finally respect yourself too much to keep living under the rule of a version that wastes your years. That is the right kind of disgust. It has direction. It has standards. It is not emotional chaos. It is moral clarity. It says, I am done being governed by the weaker system. I am done letting comfort interpret my obligations. I am done letting my old patterns write my future. This is the line where change becomes real, Not when you feel inspired, not when you make a speech, not when you write goals in a notebook, when you stop cooperating with the identity that keeps pulling you backward. That requires repetition. The old self does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It dies through starvation. Every time you refuse its logic, it weakens. Every time you do the work instead of delaying it, it weakens. Every time you keep the standard when your emotions want an exception, it weakens. Every time you stay silent instead of seeking attention, it weakens. Every time you choose structure over impulse, it weakens. This is what people miss. The death of the old self is not one decision. It is a campaign. It is repeated non-cooperation with the system that used to run you. That system may fight back. It will tell you that you are becoming too rigid, too cold, too different, or too serious. Good. Let it talk. The old you always speaks the language of preservation. It wants survival, not transformation. It wants continuity, not elevation. It wants a future that still leaves room for its habits. Do not negotiate. The old you had its time. Look at what it produced. Broken promises, wasted time, leaking focus, lowered standards, dependence on mood, dependence on noise, dependence on reaction, dependence on approval. Why would you keep consulting a system with that record? You would not hire that system to run a company. Stop letting it run your life. A new identity has to be built with intention. You do not become the next version by hoping. You become it by repeating what the old version refuses to repeat. Keep your word. Protect your time. Hold your line. Lower your reactivity. Stop oversharing. Stop asking emotions to lead. Stop treating comfort like a right. These are not random behaviors. They are acts of identity construction. They are how the old self loses ground and the new self takes territory. This is the real rebirth people talk about but rarely explain properly. It is not mystical. It is brutal and practical. A weaker way of being has to lose power so a stronger one can take command. That is the exchange. That is the sacrifice. That is the cost of becoming someone your old life can no longer contain. So decide clearly. The old you is finished, not mostly finished, not on good days only. Finished as leader, finished as decision maker, finished as the voice you keep honoring when pressure comes. Let the old self become what it should have been a long time ago. A lesson, a warning, a dead system. Then step fully into the new one. Because once the old identity loses its throne, one final truth becomes unavoidable. The highest form of power is not controlling rooms, people, or outcomes. It is controlling yourself so deeply and so consistently that no one has to watch you for you to remain dangerous. Chapter 11. Self-control is the highest form of power. A lot of people think power is about influence, about status, about how many people listen when you speak, about how much attention you command, how much force you can project, and how much space you can take in a room. That is the shallow version. It is visible so weak minds admire it quickly, but visible power is not always real power. Many people can dominate a conversation and still be slaves to impulse. Many people can control a room and still be unable to control their own tongue. Appetite, temper, fear, comfort, vanity, or need for approval. That is not power. That is performance. The highest form of power is self-control. Stable, cold, private self-control. The kind that remains when no one is watching. The kind that does not need applause. The kind that does not collapse when the mood changes. The kind that keeps the standard in place in hidden moments, boring moments, painful moments, tempting moments, and lonely moments. That is the summit. Because once you can govern yourself, the world becomes much harder to use against you. Think about what makes people easy to control. Their cravings control them. Their anger controls them. Their insecurity controls them. Their need to be liked controls them. Their need to respond controls them. Their need for comfort controls them. Their need for pleasure controls them. Their need to avoid discomfort controls them. That is how outside pressure gains access. It finds the ungoverned part and pulls there. The more ungoverned parts you have, the easier you are to move. The more governed you become, the harder you are to manipulate. That is why self-control is not only a virtue, it is a defense system. It closes access points. It reduces openings. It makes you more solid. A person who can control himself is difficult to threaten with temptation, difficult to provoke with insult, difficult to distract with noise, and difficult to weaken through comfort. He is not untouchable. He is simply less available to chaos, less available to pressure, less available to his own lower impulses. That is power in its cleanest form. Not dramatic, not loud, just odd to bend. The weak version of power always points outward. It says, control them, impress them, beat them, influence them, win the room. The stronger version points inward first. Rule yourself, govern your appetite, govern your speech, govern your reactions, govern your focus, govern your body, govern your time. Govern your inner state enough that random circumstances do not become kings over your behavior. That inward rule creates an outward force that no performance can fake for long. People feel it. They may not have language for it, but they feel it. They feel the gravity of a person whose behavior is not always up for negotiation. They feel the steadiness of a person who does not hand his center away every hour. They feel the weight of a person whose standards remain in place without supervision. That last part matters. Without supervision, anyone can behave under pressure from the outside. Anyone can perform for a boss, a crowd, a camera, a partner, or a deadline. The deeper question is, what happens when enforcement disappears? What happens when nobody checks? What happens when the room is empty? What happens when the easier option is available and invisible? What happens when no praise is coming, no punishment is coming, and only your code remains? That is where self-control proves whether it is real. Real self-control is internal law. It does not depend on witnesses. It does not depend on consequences being immediate. It does not depend on your emotions agreeing. It says, this is who I am and this is what I do, regardless of who is present. That is rare. And because it is rare, it creates a different kind of life. A person with self-control can be trusted with larger things because he has shown he can govern the smaller ones. He can be trusted with freedom because freedom will not instantly dissolve into indulgence. He can be trusted with pressure because pressure will not automatically become panic. He can be trusted with success because success will not instantly become looseness. He can be trusted with silence because silence will not become decay. This is why self-control sits at the top of the pyramid. It protects all the lower levels. Without it, discipline collapses under emotion. Standards collapse under temptation. Time collapses under distraction. Presence collapses under pressure. Identity collapses under convenience. With it, all of those structures gain reinforcement. You become a person with an internal spine. That spine is what lets you remain yourself across changing conditions. And that is what real power is, continuity of character. Under pressure, continuity of standards; under temptation, continuity of direction; under discomfort. Too many people think power is expansion, more access, more options, more attention, more freedom to do whatever you want. They are confused. Freedom without self-control becomes self-destruction. Access without self-control becomes overstimulation. Options without self-control become confusion. Attention without self-control becomes vanity. Comfort without self-control becomes rot. Self-control is what keeps freedom from turning into weakness. It is what makes power safe to carry. If you cannot govern yourself, then more success, more money, more freedom, more status, and more options will often just amplify what is already undisciplined in you. That is why the foundation matters more than the decoration. Control yourself first. Everything else becomes more useful after that. Notice what this means for your life now. It means the goal was never just productivity. It was never just becoming more focused, more serious, more disciplined, more private, or more stable. All of those were steps towards something higher: self-rule. The ability to direct yourself without needing to be dragged. The ability to keep your word without emotional assistance. The ability to live by a code when comfort would prefer a loophole. The ability to remain composed, exact, and deliberate while the world around you throws moods, temptations, opinions, pressures, and distractions in every direction. That is the final promise. Not that life becomes easy, that you become governed enough to stop being easily ruled by what used to own you. From this point forward, do not speak about self-control like it is punishment. It is freedom with structure. It is protection with dignity. It is the end of living as a servant to every passing urge. It is the end of being surprised by your own weakness because you never built law inside yourself. It is the beginning of a colder, cleaner way of living. You do what must be done. You hold what must be held. You stay where you must stay. You do not leak your center because the room got loud. You do not trade your standards because the day got hard. You do not beg mood to cooperate. You lead yourself. That is power. That is the point of this whole book. Not applause, not image, not performance, self-command. Discipline is not just a tool. It is a fortress, a private fortress, a wall the world cannot easily climb because you built law inside yourself. Money can disappear. Status can disappear. People can leave. Conditions can turn against you. But if you still have self-rule, you still have the fortress. And from inside that fortress, you can rebuild everything. From now on, you do not live by mood. You do not live by applause. You do not live by comfort. You live by standard. You hold your own line. You keep yourself facing the right direction. You become the kind of person people do not underestimate, not because you are loud, but because you are no longer easy to bend. Guard the fortress. Build it thicker. Live inside it. That is the final form.